this is one of not just the best games I've played in a long time, but probably one of the most important games I've played. It brought me back to the memories of falling in love with indie games for the first time about like a decade ago. Just kind of felt like rediscovering something. This game kind of came out of nowhere for me in the best way possible and at the best time possible too.
Just from the visual style and gameplay alone, I was already sold completely on the game, and I would definitely consider it to be an upper echelon survival horror game on that alone. But what they did with the world and story on top of that just really seals the deal. That I don't think that this game is standing on the shoulders of giants of Resident Evil and Silent Hill. I think it's a third giant.
This is why you should play Signalis. Why, hello, and welcome to another episode of Why You Should Play. 'Tis the season for horror, and for many of you who know me, know that I am not traditionally a horror guy. I dabble from time to time, once in a while when it comes to movies or games or TV shows, but I figured with it being the season, I definitely wanted to do some form of a horror game. A lot of the ones that I have played before are very, very popular, widely known ones, Resident Evil, Dead Space, etc. So I wanted to find something that was a little bit more under the radar, not necessarily a huge budget AAA game. And I've had this game called Signalis enthusiastically evangelized to me numerous times by numerous people. And two such esteemed guests are here today. As is common with this podcast, they are two of the people that I most closely associate with evangelizing for this game. And so two of them here today. My first guest is a returning guest. Many people know him as the Suda guy, which is a term of affection, and I'm sure a term that he is honored by. He is a massive Suda 51 and Grasshopper Manufacturer fan. He is a massive fan of appropriately survival horror games, specifically Resident Evil. And I believe Resident Evil 4 is among his favorite games of all time, if not his favorites. He is also a massive fan of FromSoft games and just generally a massive fan of horror as well. So, Sam, welcome back to the program. It's nice to have you back.
Thank you for inviting me back. Am I your first returning guest?
I believe you are.
Oh, I somehow came back before Sean Mason. That's wow. So it's an honor. You should have had him back.
I know Sean is just too busy. He is a man of actual extensive, important responsibilities, and we will have him back. We have actually discussed one or two specific games, so he will be a returning guest.
For sure. Yeah, he is the best of us. Right on.
For sure.
But yeah, thank you for having me back.
My new guest. He is also named Sam. He is also into survival horror games. He is also into FromSoft games. He's also a huge enthusiast of horror in general, movies and TV. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that he is a huge fan of dinosaurs. Moki is here. Moki, how are you?
Hello, I am doing good.
Awesome. So, boys, first of all, thank you both for making time out on a weekday. I know all three of us are working men, sometimes pretending to work, but we all have traditional 5-day jobs. So I appreciate you both taking time out. And we want to start kind of as we usually do with a soft opening of what have you both been playing? We'll start with Moki.
Yeah, I was just I was telling you guys before the call, but I've been primarily playing Mario Wonder right now, and it is an absolute joy, just an absolute home run. I was definitely somebody that was nervous about what 2D Mario would be like returning, but as soon as they showed that initial Wonder trailer, I was full in. The game has delivered so far. And then I plan to start up Spider-Man 2 soonish, so.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm very excited for Wonder. I played a little bit of co-op with my nephew who I think no matter how much I enjoy the game, he will enjoy it more, but I think that's the more important thing, honestly. So, Crash Bandicoot, Sam, what have you been up to gaming-wise?
I've been playing one too many games this past month, so I think the only thing I'm gonna really shout out today that I've played this past month in particular is the original Fear, made by Monolith Studios, who famously well known, made Condemned back in the day as well, and have moved on to other things. But since it is October, I just was like, I need to play some horror games, and I don't know what to play, and Fear was just kind of staring at me on my Steam page, and it's quite the time capsule of a game, and it was almost nostalgic playing it too, because it just kind of brought me back to that experimental era of like first person shooters, and it's more action than it is a horror game, but like the atmosphere is really great in it, and it's a lot like Half-Life, and it's got the physics of like a Valve game. It was a blast to go back to. So just primarily it was that, and I'm still chipping away at Starfield, which is a game I think most people are moved on from, but I'm late to the party on that one.
I haven't even started it yet, so you're ahead of me. But Fear is an absolute banger. Any game that has a bullet time mechanic,
Yes.
as this podcast has failed to mention during the Vanquish episode,
Ooh.
is extremely keyno. Put it in every single action game.
Well, we did mention the bullet time. We just
didn't give it enough love.
We don't hyper focus on this podcast. I have a few others. If you're into hyper focusing, I can reference you to those. But seriously, Sam mentioned kind of time capsule video games and going back in time. And on that note, we are here to discuss honestly this tremendous debut effort that is called Signalis. And a recurring topic that I want to reiterate is, why did I choose this game? Well, one is obviously that these two fine gentlemen, among a few others, were ones that really advocated for this game, and I was very curious because it does have that sort of throwback style, which we'll go into later on. And obviously, it being October, the month of horror, and I wanted to play something outside of my comfort zone. I got a little bit of the survival horror itch to some degree when I picked the original Dead Space back up, and I know that's not necessarily true survival horror. People have called that one like RE4 in space, a little bit more action oriented, but Signalis is much more of a true survival horror in the vein of a Resident Evil or Silent Hill, which again my two esteemed guests here will wax on poetically about shortly. And as it so happens, Signalis did release, and I want to get this episode out on the 27th, so it will have released exactly 1 year ago to the release of this episode on October 27th, 2022. And it was developed by a two-person team called Rose Engine. Again, that is not a game engine. That's just the name of the team, Rose Engine. It's a primarily two-person team, two individuals by the name of Yuri Stern and Barbara Whitman, based out of Hamburg, Germany. And it says on their website that they have been making games since, I believe, 2014, but I believe this is the first game that they've really developed and published and released to market. So it is an extraordinary debut effort, which we will go into more detail why shortly. But for the both of you, we'll start with Sam DeCoop. What is your history with Signalis? How did you discover it?
I thought it was originally during like one of the Xbox shows sometime a year ago, but I think I just saw the release date trailer for it back in, it had to be summer last year, because it was months before the game was releasing, and they like announced like, hey, like our game's coming out this October, and it's also coming to Game Pass. And I was like, ooh, I'll keep my eye on that. Like the visuals caught my eye immediately. What I saw of it right then and there, I was like, okay, yeah, like show me, when a game has a, much like any kind of movie trailer, I want a game trailer to kind of express tone and show off primarily its style and gameplay, just what it has to offer without not showing too much. And that trailer made me aware of it. And then following later that year in October, some friends of ours, mutuals, and who've listened to this show, were the ones that played it first before me, and were like, hey, this game's really something else. And people were like, you're the person in particular I'm thinking of after playing this game, because this just seems like something be right up your alley. And I was like, okay, like it's already on my radar, I'll get to it. They announced a physical edition, which I usually preach about physical games media and preservation and stuff. So
Yes.
I was like, yeah, as soon as I saw that was announced, I was like, yeah, I can wait. It was a busy time for me late last year. I wasn't really playing any new games then, up until like early next year again, when I finally was settled in and kind of used to my new life. So I ended up playing it when the physical version dropped in February, and it is one of few games to really kind of light something up in my brain as soon as I immediately started it. But I'll let Moki kind of talk about how he came to it.
Yeah, and really quickly, I wanted to. You used a word when you were talking about this game. I don't think just now, but talking to me about it, you gave it the vaunted M word that I've hardly ever rarely use. You call it a masterpiece, correct?
Yeah, I try and not use that word often.
Me
Not
either.
just, yeah, like, not out of kind of some like,
Words have meaning.
words have meaning, and I don't hold my opinions above others, but I do try and be cautious of how I use certain words to kind of share other pieces of art with people. And this is one in particular where, yeah, I would use that M word, the masterpiece. And this is one of not just the best games I've played in a long time, but it's probably one of the most important games I've played. It brought me back to the memories of falling in love with indie games for the first time about like a decade ago. Just kind of felt like rediscovering something. This game kind of came out of nowhere for me in the best way possible and at the best time possible too.
Moki, you may have been one of those aforementioned in our friend group that evangelized this to Sam, but what is your history with discovering it and becoming an evangelist of it?
So the initial trailer that I saw was, I think, at like one of those. It wasn't like one of the main conferences. It was like I don't think Annapurna, because it's not there yet. Like a Tribeca showcase or something. One of those. And I remember seeing it. I'm just like the visual style immediately. Any game with fixed camera style is already an automatic good game for me. I don't care what else you do, but I just love the style so much. I was like, oh my God, this looks like such a cool game. And then one of the few YouTubers that I actually still keep up with, Avalanche Reviews. He's a big survival horror focused YouTuber looking at the Resident Evil and Silent Hill games primarily. Does make some great content. He released a video, might have been like a week before the game came out, or maybe it was on release day, just saying that it was just basically singing its praises about how it's such a true to form survival horror game and genuinely good. And it was like a 40-minute video. I remember I got like 15 minutes in. I was like, okay, like I'm so convinced I need to play this. And then like Sam, I waited for the physical release, which came kind of late. But yeah, we do what we must for physical. And so I played it on whenever that was, March, and then fell in love with the game and just been soft and hard shilling it to pretty much everybody that's been caught in my blast.
For sure. Yeah, I totally get that when you want to really signal boost something that has flown under the radar, even though it's been there on Game Pass. And I think people maybe dismiss it for the really top-down 2.5D style. But yeah, it did release on October 22nd, 2022. So about a year ago from when this podcast episode will be releasing. As I said, it's from a primarily two-person team out of Hamburg, Germany. And so what I wanted to start off with for the game is this game wears its influences and its inspirations on its sleeve. And I think what's really unique and special about it is that it draws influences and inspirations not just from games, but from movies and TV and even books. And so, given that it is a video game, I wanted to leave the kind of game influences and inspirations last and dip into a little bit of the movies and TV stuff. So, I'll start off with kind of really basic influences. Like the one of them is Alien, given that it's a very sci-fi setting. There is a claustrophobia aspect when you're on a ship and you're trying to navigate the ship, and creatures and beings, shall we say, will pop out of the floor, they'll pop out of the wall. I think sometimes they'll even pop out of the ceiling. So it always keeps you on edge, and the claustrophobia is what really sets the atmosphere and the mood. I think there's a little bit of I got a little bit of Event Horizon vibes as well. And then one other influence that I'll shout out, I'll let you guys wax on poetically about the influences since you have more history with that genre. But there is a specific reference to The Shining, which I grinned from ear to ear when I saw it. You'll know it if you've seen The Shining before. You'll be able to immediately identify it. Let's start with Sam Bandicoot. What are some of the influences and inspirations for movies and TV?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Shining thing because this game is just loaded with its inspirations on its sleeve across like different mediums, and it does so like very effortlessly, and doesn't feel tacky or too on the nose at any point. It's just like all of it's from a labor of love. But just to kind of hone in on the Alien inspiration, like that retro tech design of all the computers and like the setting itself, it's like that and Blade Runner, just that kind of Ridley Scott, HR Giger kind of just mix of things. It's that, and a couple of animes came to mind for just like in terms of TV inspiration. Neon Genesis Evangelion comes to mind. There's like some nice little clever homages to that show. It's one of my favorite TV series.
There's a lot of striking visuals.
There's a lot of striking visuals, and it kind of shares that with that particular show. There's a bit of crossover between this game and that show in some weird ways, but yeah, like in terms of film and TV, those are the ones that kind of come to mind for me first. And I saw someone mentioned, I haven't seen this one, but someone said it kind of reminded them of a show called Elfin Lied, I think it's called. I haven't seen
No,
that one.
no, we do not talk about that show on this
Okay.
podcast. Drop it.
Okay, so Sam Bandicoot is done with his movie and TV influences part. So Moki, take over. What did you what came to your mind while you were playing it?
It's funny that there's definitely like alien influences in terms of like tone and stuff, but the Yuri actually tweeted out specifically at some point. Also, I forgot to mention both creators have been pretty active on Twitter throughout the entire development of this game. I did not see it as I was going down, but I've kind of scrolled through some of their old tweets, and there's a lot of they've been pretty candid about their design process for the game. So there's kind of a lot of lore info there. But Yuri at some point said she was kind of so sick of seeing that same alien Western design specifically and aesthetic of the ships that she specifically tried to design the ship in Signalis to kind of have a very more distinct visual style. So that's just one thing. But yeah, I don't know. You guys pretty much covered any other influences. I think probably Ghost in the Shell is probably another.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. That's a good one too. In terms of one thing, another before we get into game influences, another thing that I want to shout out is it's very H.P. Lovecraft inspired as well. That's what I'll say without going into spoilers. So yeah, the game does get very, very weird. There is a lot of striking visuals, and Sam Bandicoot spoke to this a moment ago, but the way that it interweaves all these influences is just into a really cohesive world is just masterful. It really is. That's what really, probably more, almost as much as anything else about the game, that's what struck me the most, is that all of this coalesces into this this really rich world with deep lore, and how it balances all of those things is just incredible. But boys, I'm going to let you really grab the bull by the horns with this section, because you guys are much more experienced in this realm. When we talk about game influences, Moki, I'll let you start off. Just you guys just go ham with the game influences and inspirations.
Yeah, so this game is the perfect combining of Resident Evil and Silent Hill, the original trilogies of each. And it's so amazing to me just how well blend, like what they took from both games and how well they just blended it together. Because I'd say from the gameplay side, it is very much traditional Resident Evil gameplay, where it's walking around a lot of rooms from a top down, pointing your gun and shooting an enemy. Some light melee versus like the Silent Hill kind of more run around open area, and then you go to a small area or whatever. But and then I'd say on the story side, the story is way more Silent Hill. It's probably, actually, I'd say it's completely Silent Hill, and while also being its own thing, but just in terms of the themes it presents and stuff. But on top of that, there's a copious amount of just references to both titles and kind of nods and winks and stuff that I won't say for kind of spoiler reasons, because they're fun to find. But there's just so many RE and Silent Hill things in there.
Yeah, I guess to kind of just add on to that, it is Resident Evil and Silent Hill, and it wears that very like proudly, but it never at any point did I feel like I was playing a worse versions of like any of those games. In some ways, I think to me this is like the modern day best version of a lot of those games from the past, where it's like the combat's been more fine-tuned and the art, just like a new take on visually too, and And I guess just in terms of other inspirations, before we talk about other things, there's definitely a little bit of Nier in there. The character designs kind of remind me of a couple of Nier characters, but also just what the game kind of speaks to thematically, I guess, at points, and many other things. This is a harder discussion than like the No More Heroes one, because this is the kind of game I don't want to talk too much about with its story and stuff. But I guess like its last inspiration I could really think of, one section, or not section of the game, but just one moment in the game reminded me of BioShock. And maybe other people, I'll maybe mention it off air afterwards, but maybe someone might pick it up. It's just, there is just so much in this game to talk about, but it's very hard to talk about.
One another easy thing I forgot to say is that the puzzles specifically. So survival horror, you're always kind of shooting some enemies, and then you kind of do some puzzles. You loot rooms to find stuff to go open doors and find other stuff. That's kind of the general loop. Um, Resident Evil for me has always been the better combat series. Well, Silent Hill has always been the way more massively like our actual stories, and then better puzzles. Because Resident Evil puzzles have kind of always just been like put the square peg in the square hole type things, like kind of caveman puzzles.
They're very easy.
Silent Hill, revolutionary idea, has a puzzle difficulty setting: easy, medium, and hard. And there might be very hard. No, I think there's three usually. And the hard puzzles in Silent Hill, the puzzles are more like a riddle based, so they're more like brain teasers instead of just like find the item and use the item, which I always appreciated. And I think Signalis kind of has more of that energy in it. The puzzles were a little more in depth and kind of like right in that sweet spot where I like, where they're not easy, they're not cakewalks, but they're not like impossible.
No, that's a good point. The puzzles were, I think, up until probably the very last major puzzle of the game, I wasn't stumped for too long of a time, to the point where I got like genuinely frustrated and wanted to look up a pointer or a hint or a guide or something. But it balances the kind of the gameplay and puzzle aspects so well, and part of this game's amazing balancing act to make it into a package is something that is really elevates it, in my opinion. So, boys, we've come to what I think you'll both probably agree will probably be the shortest section of this whole episode, which is I'm kind of lumping together the premise, the story, and the themes. So I'm going to be very brief. I suspect you both will be as well, but I wanted to speak to it a little bit to kind of set the table for people and what they can expect. The story I have down is one sentence: you're an android named Elster who wakes up in a pod on a derelict ship, and you want to find your shipmate. That is the story. That's it. I'm not saying anything else. Is that accurate? I don't want to go any further.
That's accurate, and that is the best. That's about as much as you could say.
Yeah, I'll just take a second to just gush then in terms of, while I won't say anything about the story itself, the world that they created is so incredibly well thought out and expansive and detailed, and like you get amazed by how much they kind of packed into this. And it's primarily revealed, it's kind of one of those where there's a lot of main story up front, but there's also a lot of it buried in kind of data logs, and whatever, messages, where it's like, oh, you forgot to take the package from unit 2B, whatever, blah blah blah. Which, and I think they're actually pretty well written entries overall. Like they're not dry. They feel they have a lot of personality.
As somebody who usually kind of like gets annoyed at a lot, like most games kind of,
you just glaze over.
Yeah, you just glaze over, because like so many games just, it's an afterthought. And this game, I was always looking for every single note I can find and every piece of lore, and just to touch on that world building stuff. Within the last year, we had one of the biggest AAA releases to ever like ascend like critical, like, a critical darling, in the form of Elden Ring, which co-written by like one of the world's most famous authors. And it's this,
the lore is insane.
The lore is insane in that game, and the fact that I played another game within this short time period that I very much to the same degree love and adore for its world building and lore as much as that game, is like a testament to this two-person team, this two-person passion project, really, that just kind of has like so much that so many other games. They wish they could have this. It is as this game's world and its lore, its characters and stuff to me is as good as that of like a BioShock and other some of the best narratives in games.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would
this is
agree. I think really quickly, you both touched on this. Another aspect of this game that I didn't think about in terms of giving it effusive praise is that looking back and playing it, I don't think that I have ever been as interested in reading the lore in many, many years as I have with playing this game as well. And it's because of like this. Like I'm admittedly a simp for sci-fi. Like I love that kind of stuff. Not to go into spoilers, but you're an android, right? So it comes with it kind of like topics about AI and such. You know, artificial intelligence, existence. What does it mean to be alive and have life experiences? So all of those elements combined with the broader lore of what I will say is kind of like the socio-political breakdown, the history of how your, I guess, civilization came to be, the chain of events that led up to it. I found all of it just so engrossing. I'll kick it back to you, Moki. You were going to say something.
I was just gonna say that for the crowd that's like video game writing is like not real writing. It's like it's like a level below like actual writing. This game is one of the ones I would point to where it's like this is actually like a well written thing across the board.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And to reiterate how it all really kind of fits together, a lot of it is kind of presented as bureaucratic logs, like, oh, it's a status report or it's like a memo, but it's also really, really richly written and engrossing. Honestly, and feels like all of this stuff could have existed, in some other universe or some other timeline, and it's very it's very environmental too. Like you'll want to look at posters that are able to be selected and looked at. You'll want to look at photos. You'll want to look at objects around the world that you may not be able to pick up or may not have like a actual functional use in your environment. They may not be a tool or a weapon or maybe a piece of a puzzle. They're just pieces of lore and information that you can glean and read into. And I think even if uh, I think either if you're looking for like any kind of narrative, even if one of the lore or the story didn't work for you, I think the other one will work for you. I think you will definitely get something out of this, whether it's sort of immediate story that you're going on this experience with Elster, or if you get something more out of the lore or the themes that it explores, you're definitely going to get something out of it. But like I mentioned, it has to do with the themes are kind of like Android and AI related. They're not necessarily anything that's really new, but it feels more personal, is what I will say.
One last thing I would tag on is just the presentation of the story is also like one of the genuinely amazing things in terms of just how they decide to visually frame some moments, whether it was kind of in engine or more through a traditional cutscene. And especially some of the more like esoteric moments. It would be a big spoiler to say what I want to say for some parts of the game, but it's a very cool when you get to these kind of certain moments.
I just wanted to touch on that because it does kind of tie into one of my notes just about the game's kind of overall presentation. Like I was pretty in awe with how it just kind of presents its story, and it is a really refreshing way this game does tell its story. It's not direct, but it's not like intentionally obtuse to the point that it's like like annoying. Like it's not annoyingly ambiguous or anything like that. It's not alienating the player in any kind of way and trying to like act. It's a lot deeper than it is. There's a lot more to it on a than what you're presented with in certain scenes, and if you want to like read into its subtext and its symbolism, you absolutely can. And I think it's funny because even after having played this game like twice to completion, I still haven't really gone down the rabbit hole to the point where I like want a definitive answer. I feel like I still walked away from this experience just wanting my own personal interpretations of the story and what it kind of also just means to me, because this, I guess I'll just say, like the ending of the game like personally connected with me in a certain way. I don't think too many other games have connected with me. And just kind of like on the AI note from earlier, this is I guess I just forgot to mention from the top earlier, this is without a doubt the best sci-fi horror, not just one of the best gaming narratives, but definitely best sci-fi horror one I've experienced since the frictional games Soma. video game, which came out in 2015. And that game, and I like Signalis more just because this game just offers much more in a gameplay department, and it does things, as much as I love Soma and adore it, it's more of a walking sim with dialogue. This is much more of a video game where you have to play it and you kind of have to work these things out for yourself, than rather, not necessarily spoon fed, but just a certain, this game could only exist in the form of a game, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I guess thinking back, that kind of reminds me. Like, would you say there's a little Jacob's ladder in this game as well?
Yeah, there's a little bit in there. Yeah.
Maybe not intentionally, but just kind of
Not yeah,
similar vibe.
there's definitely a similar vibe. I've seen some people also mention that this game kind of shares a lot with Silent Hill 2, and I do agree to that to a degree, but I do think it's almost a disservice to like just compare it to that game, because that Silent Hill 2 is going for so many different things and is
Yeah,
tackling so many different themes that I get the
I'd
comparison.
say the themes itself are completely different,
They
though.
are,
Like
yeah, they are
the
so
cores.
completely different than Silent Hill 2's, and narratively and characters and stuff. I totally get the sentiment of wanting to compare it to that game, because that game is often regarded as like the greatest survival horror game of all time with its narrative. So
I'd say the biggest thing is the visual style. Kind of definitely pulls a lot
yeah,
of Silent Hill, just in terms of how the environments kind of are laid out and thrown, and the sound
for
design.
sure.
A lot of industrial sounds. The soundtrack is just incredible across the board. It's so good.
Name dropping specific games. We all agree we're broaching on getting into spoilers. So
Yeah,
I did. I want to talk about it so bad. That's the thing.
I can hear both of you like straining from behind your microphones. But to save us all the agony, we're going to move on to kind of the meat and potatoes of the game, which is the gameplay. I'll run through like a really broad description of the overall gameplay experience, and you guys can feel free to springboard off of any one of them, or whatever you guys want to take it. And so, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it is a sort of retro style survival horror game. It is top down, sort of 2.5D, with survival horror gameplay, which means combat. You get a kind of usual combat weapons. You get a handgun, a revolver, a rifle, a submachine gun. You get a few other weapons that I don't really want to spoil. I think some of them are kind of like homages to gameplay styles and approaches and mechanics. But it is twin stick. I like twin stick. I find them weirdly satisfying. I don't know if that's maybe going back to the days of like the old arcade shooters or what have you, but I do enjoy it. And you guys both mentioned this, but there are occasional puzzles in the game. I liked the puzzles quite a bit. Moki mentioned I found them challenging, but not really obtuse or overbearing or overly complicated. And they work well within the environment as well. They did a good job of putting thought into like, hey, here's this puzzle, how it kind of fits into this larger world and the problem that needs to be solved. And broadly, there is backtracking. You'll go back between rooms to grab an item and go back to another room to solve the puzzle in there. And in real Resident Evil fashion, yes, there are manual save rooms. So that is, without going into spoilers, I think that kind of covered the broad aspects of the gameplay. And one other thing that I thought of earlier that I wanted to shout out is that the gameplay elements, that's very organic. The game teaches you organically. So like the game tells you early on, hey, you're an android. You can only carry 6 things at once, which the game is telling you that, hey, you only have a maximum of 6 items in your inventory. Or it tells you it tells you need to manually save by saying, oh, you make sure you log all of your duties every time you accomplish something. That's the game telling you, hey, you have to manually save in the room. So it does dole out information to you. It just doesn't do it directly. So you have to be really sharp and at your which would again, it didn't feel obtuse, but it didn't feel like it was holding your hand. I don't think there's any actual map markers in the game. But what I do like, another thing that I do like that I didn't have down here, I think the map is shockingly very good. That's probably one of my most pleasant surprises about the game is I really, really liked the map. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about kind of map and UI and UX, how intuitive all of those elements are. But again, it's another testament to this game that how well it explores themes and story and narrative, that it nails all of these gameplay elements is just what elevates it so much for me, and why I think the world of this game, despite, again, as I said, survival horror is not really my thing, but this one just elevated the genre, I think, to be something that's really transcendent. So I've said my spiel. I will let you two gentlemen go off. We'll start with Moki.
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's pretty much that Resident Evil style like Resident Evil 1 style gameplay of kind of being a central hub area, going around exploring rooms, and the gunplay feels very Resident Evil. One other thing is that there's like the little radio is kind of like a big element of the game where you have and that's like a Silent Hill
Yeah.
inspiration of just character carrying a radio. And that's the thing. It's like just back and forth. It's like, okay, limited inventory, like that's Resident Evil, but then you got a radio, like that's Silent Hill, and like there's dedicated save rooms with like amazing save room music, like that's Resident Evil, but the little save is a little red square. Like, oh, that's Silent Hill. Like it just constantly ping pongs, and it's all integrated into the game's world
Yeah, it all
itself, and it
feels
doesn't
like it
it doesn't
fits.
feel like a ripoff. Like they definitely made this game their own thing. But the radio is very fun. It's used for puzzles and unlocking stuff and combat too, which is cool.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The radio, that's what another thing that really pleasantly surprised me is I was like, oh God, a radio. But it's done so well. Every time I was concerned about something in this game, it allayed my fears very, very quickly and became just another strength of the game. But anything else, Moki, that you wanted to shout out?
No, I think that's all I got for now.
Sorry. So Sam DeCoot, what you're up to bat?
Yeah, I echo all those same statements Moki just said, but I guess to kind of come from it from my own angle, I remembered what I forgot, and it's the mix of gameplay and presentation is what elevates this game. A lot of indie games within the last 10 years have kind of been talked about whether or not like, oh, these games feel cheap or very like half baked, and people just kind of like accept these things about like games like this because, oh, it was made by a small team, so like we're going to be as forgiving. It's like, no, this isn't the case with this particular game for me. I think the gameplay is as good, if not better, than a lot of the games it's paying homage to. I think the presentation, like the combination of that and its presentation overall, is just as good as that of like your modern AAA game releases to me, where so many games are coming out unfinished, half broken, half baked, and that integration of the world itself into the gameplay and like kind of how you learn the games. I don't even want to call it a tutorial because you kind of just figure these things out on your own through the game's world, and it's really just all genius. It kind of just all coalesces together, and that's why I speak so highly of this game, because it's not just like it excels at one like thing particularly well. It's everything is working together to kind of just come together as this beautiful package of a game. Frankly haven't had really with many games at all. And the gunplay feels really good. It is stressful. You get a lot of the times you get locked into these rooms with enemies, and it's a lot of the times it's very dark, and you kind of you're stressing out whether or not you either have enough ammo, and that's very much like Resident Evil. And thankfully, yeah, it kind of beats a lot of Silent Hill's gameplay, because my issues with those games would be that a lot of the times in older Silent Hill games I had like too much ammo and resources to kind of make it out, unless I was playing on like the hardest difficulty. So I'm really glad playing this game, which I don't remember there. You just start the game, right? There's no difficulty, or there is difficulties, right?
There's a normal, easy, and survival.
Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to remember because for the platinum, yeah, I did play it on survival for the platinum. But normal felt like really balanced. I felt like I was pretty sweaty at points, and in a lot of the confrontations, and would generally in playing on survival, man. It's like, holy. Thankfully, that was my second playthrough, and I was navigating around and kind of knew where I was going, because like, oh, just there's it's real sweaty running between those corridors and trying to fit between enemies and not have them grab you. But yeah, just to echo again, it's from the top, it's just a beautiful mix of the two, and agree with everything Moki said. And
like you said, the game, it feels like a survival horror game that was made in 22. Like they modernized it, so the game just feels fun to play.
It really does.
Yeah, there's a few things that I wanted to highlight. Just thinking more about the game and listening to you all talk about it, is that the opening area of the game, it's really small. It's basically like the main cabin of your ship. The game teaches you so well that, like you said, Sam, there really is no true tutorial. The game teaches you things that you need to apply throughout the rest of the game. Like early on, you have to look at a note on a desk or on a case of something, and that gives you a hint to a puzzle, and you have to pick up a picture that helps you solve another puzzle, and you look at a poster that tells you like, hey, you can only carry up to 6 items, or so it teaches you all these things that you're going to regularly utilize throughout the rest of the game. And another aspect of the combat as well is that when we talk about kind of like production value and atmospheres, that the guns, they sound so good as well when you're firing them. I think
Yes.
like you can hear the bullet casings hit the ground. I just there's something about that in games when you hear the actual bullets hit the ground. It's just so atmospheric and realistic, and almost adds. It really does add to the sensation of you firing the weapon. And I want to say there's some smoke effects as well when you fire the gun. It's just all these things that are so atmospheric for a game that's it doesn't have a single line of spoken dialogue. There's no VO at all. It's all text based. When you're talking, or whether some other characters are talking, and it's all text, but they understood how to still make their game immersive and atmospheric. And that's what really I took from it. And when you traverse all these different rooms, they feel like they exist in the same universe, but the way they use the lighting and the atmosphere and the way the rooms are very distinct. Like, you're in the same environment, you may be in the same area of the ship, but you can kind of know which room is which, due to like some of the design or the furniture or the layout. It all works so well together, I think, and you never really have to stray too far, I don't think, from a save room. The game eventually does help you out with additional means of shortcuts and traversal. I always love unlocking shortcuts in games. I know you guys are massive FromSoft fans and Metroidvania fans. I think that like finding a shortcut somewhere is really almost the sense of accomplishment that I feel from beating a boss in these types of games. But what else that we want to highlight from the gameplay? Anything else that y'all wanted to shout out?
I'll shout out the radio again, just how it's used, and just kind of like things you pick up in the world that kind of eventually come back to make their way back into like the either the story or the gameplay itself. You're like, oh, this is what this is used for. And I guess just to speak back to what I said earlier, I kind of these things like the presentation and gameplay being so impressive to me, because you know who you are, but a friend of ours kind of called this game, kind of criticized this game for being a little cheap, and they kind of implied that, oh, with a bit more money, this game could have been, like if it had like a bit more work done to it, it could have been better. I'm like, well, I know there'll be some caveats maybe later, but I genuinely don't have any issue with it, and I'm just impressed with what they were able to accomplish so much as a small team that teams of dozens or hundreds of people, they wish they could kind of accomplish this level of detail on just this scale. I'd never play games twice. Like, I played this game twice in a row when I got my hands on it finally, and I never do that. And that's both because of when we were talking about story earlier, but because of its gameplay is so much fun, and just trying to speed run it too. Like, I'm sure this will become like a future speed run game for people to blast their way through at GDQ every year, because it's so much fun. It's both exploring and enemy encounters and all that.
Replaying and speedrunning a survival horror game, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Isn't there a certain franchise that's known for that?
Yes.
But no, as far as like the budget, I mean, I think all of us would be better off with a little bit more money, wouldn't we? I think.
Yeah.
Oh, of course.
we all could use more budget.
I don't know if anybody mentioned, but there's even like the gunplay. There's the little like aim module tracker.
Yep.
So it's not just like the Resident Evil R1X, point and shoot to shoot your gun. You have to be positioned. They make the environment set up really well that you can't just like shoot enemies from across rooms. Like, there might be a pillar in the way, and you kind of gotta maneuver around it and stuff. So a lot of the encounters are very, very thoughtful, and just that little extra element of kind of it taking an extra 1.5 seconds to line up your shot before you can take it just adds an element to the survival horror, the fear.
Maybe I touched on this earlier. Maybe one of you mentioned. I think the lighting is so good in this game and so effectively used that I don't think that true older games would be able to pull off due to maybe the technological limitations. But yeah, they just use all of their resources so effectively well. I think for a game like this, when you can create that sense of atmosphere and just be fully dedicated to it and fully lean into it, it's something that I couldn't really put this game down. It's very rare that I get genuinely sucked into a game and really want to, I don't want to say fly through it, but I really want it to be like my primary main focus. And without spoilers, the way this game is kind of structured and laid out, it made me want to do that even more. Oh, and the music is amazing too. Just speaking of atmosphere, it draws from classical music as well.
A little bit, yeah.
A lot of new tracks that are just, again, it just leans into the atmosphere, and there's like a I don't know, it's kind of hard. It's almost like a melancholy tone, I would say, maybe it's more Silent Hill again, but
There's like I want to say it's like sci-fi synth with industrial, like the Silent Hill kind of industrial style. But then yeah, like you said, there's kind of this kind of beautiful melancholy kind of melody, or whether it's piano or some other instruments that kind of carry the emotional weight. But you mentioned flying through it. I forgot to mention when I was going through my experience with the game that whenever the release happened, I think it was like on a Friday, the physical, or whenever I got it, I booted the game up Saturday morning and I beat the entire thing in one play session. I just one shotted the game.
I did as well. I
And then
literally did as
I went
well.
back to play it again a couple weeks later. Yeah, I'm the exact opposite of Sam, where for at least survival horror, I'll literally play these things 3 and 4 times back to back immediately, because I just I love the rush of not necessarily speed running, but just like flying through the game once you kind of know what to do, and the combat encounters, because you know what's coming, you know how to deal with them, so you play better, you save more ammo, and you just like feel awesome. So it's always very rewarding, and this game definitely provides that, while also a second playthrough serves very well for getting more out of the story, just because there's a lot and there's a lot to unpack.
again, in terms of the story and lore, I think someone will get. I mean, if you're at all a fan of horror, you're going to get something out of this game, even if it's just one thing. Even if you're going in just looking to pick out influences, if sci-fi isn't your thing, you'll pick out influences from Resident Evil and Silent Hill. And if you're a fan of any kind of horror movies, books, you're going to get something out of it as well. And in fact, I think I sent it to both of you. I shortly after I completed the game, I listened to a 2 hour kind of story and lore dump on the game, because I wanted to learn more about it. And I don't think that, again, I don't know that any other game world has done that to me. So again, it's a testament to how well thought out the game is from a gameplay and story and lore perspective. And yeah, I can't wait to see what they do next. I would assume it's maybe another survival horror, but who knows? I will certainly be there day one. But yeah, anything else about the game that you all wanted to shout out or highlight, or felt got underserved or not mentioned?
I definitely want to just recommend to people that please don't use a guide if you plan on playing this. If you really feel like you're stumped, then yes. I'm not, and I'm not also one to really always tell people like how you should experience art and how you should play these things. But in the particular case of this game, it really just kind of like it's really rewarding that you don't use a guide, because there's like one part very early on in the game I got stumped, and I really should have figured it out sooner, because as soon as I figured it out I was like, oh, I'm dumb.
Everybody gets one of those. It happens. Yeah, you get one. You always get the one. Oh God, I should have known.
Yeah, that's basically it. Just kind of recommend that. And
Yeah, and I totally get that. I think you sent that one to us, and that one really didn't stump me when I figured out what I needed to accomplish for that puzzle. Like, oh, okay, this is what I need to do with these shapes and whatnot. But yeah, definitely don't look up like a step by step guide. Like Sam said, if you need a solution for a puzzle and you're just like completely lost or stumped, then go ahead and look up there. But to shout out the map again, it does a really good job of like telling you which rooms you have or haven't explored, which ones are still like locked off to you that you don't have a key. Again, it does all of those things. Like, it visually represents all of those aspects really, really well. So again, it speaks to the thought of the design of the game.
And I'd say that the game has kind of earned a right to as much immersion you can give it. Headphones or surround sound, kind of no other distractions. Kind of
dark
dark
room.
room, and it's not even dark room for like the scare factor, just because it's like a gorgeously presented game, and just being fully focused on the environments they let. Like, you'll be engrossed and just being sucked into the world.
It's not necessarily the horror. I think playing it in the dark room adds to the claustrophobia, I think, as well. It's like you're in a vacuum. Yeah, it's like you're in a vacuum almost. Yeah.
Yeah, just a quick highlight in the gameplay department. The last third of the game, where it does start to amp up a bit of the challenge, and maybe we might talk about that in the caveats. And I know that's where a lot of people not everyone I've talked to, but there's some people I've talked to who take issue with.
It's intense.
It is. That is, yeah, that's where the game both tests you on your combat abilities the most, and also your puzzle abilities the most, and just kind of like,
It visually represents that too. You go into this area and you're like, oh man, this is insane. And yeah, we don't want to veer into spoilers, but
not to obviously spoil. And one thing I've noticed about a lot of survival horror games is that a lot of the times the games don't really know how to like end, or just kind of, I find a lot of survival horror games just kind of have a lackluster last third, and I'm really happy to say that this is like one of few where the tension doesn't fizzle out, or it doesn't stop introducing any kind of like new elements. It just keeps ramping up until like the last few moments, and the final few moments of the game are like, once you get through it and you get the ending, it's so worth it.
yeah, it really is. Again, we don't want to go into spoilers, and we're not, we're never going to spoil anything. We try not to in this podcast. But yeah, the last sort of act of this game is genuinely shocked and surprised me where it went, because it is just truly insane. But yeah, we're not going to speak any more to that.
I wish I could, but that's all I can
No,
say.
no, no. Honestly, if we were to talk spoilers in this game, this podcast would be like 4 hours at least, because there would be so much to gush about. But now we get into the usual caveats portion of this episode, which is the spirit of this podcast is not to be negative, but we want to kind of have to set people's expectations, some qualifiers with what to expect with the game if there's any kind of hangups that you may experience. And the first one that I think we'll maybe have a little bit of a mini tussle here is the inventory. And as I said, you do get the maximum 6 slot inventory. You can never upgrade that, so you are locked to that. And near the end of the game, it does get pretty insane, including one portion that's involving a puzzle that really is quite demanding of your inventory. I know I was not a huge fan of it. I don't think Moki is kind of either. I know Sam is a defender of it, so this will maybe get some good discussion going. But the one caveat I have within the inventory is like, why did you make the flashlight part of the inventory? Just like it's there on your chest, just
That's the part I understand people's complaints with. I was literally, that was the first thing I was going to mention, or like hoping someone would mention, just like the flashlight itself.
Or my other solution is like maybe you have to earn that kind of inventory upgrade. Not that it's going to be given to
For
you.
sure, for sure.
Maybe do a side puzzle or find a side room or find a side key to unlock something. Because like your character is an android, right? So I'm thinking like, oh, you can put it into the lore or something like, oh, you unlocked an additional inventory carrying slot. You upgraded your model or firmware or something. Make up some lore thing that
Yeah, for sure.
to do that. But yeah, it wasn't that big of an issue until like near the end of the game, where it's like, oh man, I can barely carry anything because I have to carry items towards a puzzle, or I'm carrying or I went through like 2 or 3 rooms and I'm picking up stuff. And there was one point where I was literally running back and forth without a single weapon. I'm like, oh my god. But yeah, Moki, what was your overall thoughts about the inventory?
I think I'd say for me, I think by the third act they could have done to give you a two item pouch upgrade, or there's basically 2 items that are kind of like pseudo key items, where like you mentioned the flashlight, and then there's a I guess you could call it like an in-game, in-universe screenshot item, where if you didn't want to use an external, like take a picture with your phone of the screen, or like screen clip your computer monitor. And that's that's literally what I started doing. But it is very awesome that they gave you kind of an in-game tool, so you really don't need to break immersion, where you can screenshot a puzzle and then pull it up when you go to the next room over, so you don't have to like try and memorize it. But I think for me, they could have made those either be permanent augments, where it's like you said, you unlock it, like you get the flashlight, and then just make it like a toggle button, like you're like an R3 or something. And then the screenshot tool definitely could have just been its own button and not take up an inventory slot. But yeah, I think for me, I'm generally fine with limited inventory overall, but I think with how much stuff the game starts giving you at the end, even on survival difficulty, because it's like, yeah, I need at least 1 weapon, ammo for that weapon, like flares, and that's already half your inventory right there. And then the puzzles start having 4 or 5 items, and you definitely start feeling like a pack mule in that final section.
the intuitiveness of the map is that it does label the rooms that are completely dark. So it's like, oh, you'll kind of know if you're going to go into that room that you'll really need your flashlight. I mean, I had the flashlight more often than not on me just due to the nature of I want to be able to more easily pick out a specific enemy or kind of survey the room and see maybe if there's a note or a poster or something that I may want to pick out. But yeah, and if I remember, your flashlight goes in one of the weapon slots, right? Or does it go in the tool slot?
Goes in the tool slot, I believe.
Because you do have a tool slot that's for like a health injection, or I think for the screenshot kind of security camera tool. And
Yeah, because if you put a health thing in there, that's where the button for the because you use that button for like the flashlight or
oh
the
yeah, and you get
I
like the
was, and
shock. What do they call it? The
you could
shock
it's like a quick
taser? Yeah, or yeah, stun baton, stun baton. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the stun baton. Thank you. Yeah, but yeah, in terms of I guess just general caveats. Yeah, I really again this is the I think like the second to the previous episode I was on. I really don't I'm talking about like one of my favorite games, and this is another one where I just particularly don't have too many general qualms, quarrels, or flaws.
My other caveats were we mentioned this. We mentioned both of these already, but try to avoid using a guide. If you're just completely stumped on a puzzle or you're completely stumped on where to go to grab like a certain key or item, then by all means go there and check it out. But I never found this game overwhelming or overbearing or overly obtuse. I was pretty able, aside from the inventory, that was by far the biggest sort of barrier, and that fluctuated based on my situation and what I felt I needed with me. But the other, again, no spoilers, and we mentioned this, there are multiple acts and endings to this game, is what I will say. So the game does kind of mess with you a little bit, and the more you play the game, the more it kind of messes with you. But it does become more rewarding, in my opinion, is what I will say. So, about the anything else about the acts or the multiple acts or endings?
I will just note on the endings thing that kind of ties into the guide. There was a interesting, I think it was a tweet from Yuri Stern that I have here, or at least just a quote from them that they kind of just said like uh, they just wish that people would be more open to like letting others figure out for themselves how just like kind of come to their own conclusion with this game. And I really feel that sentiment because when I played this game I didn't know that like I was like, does this have multiple endings like Silent Hill? And it does. And I just want to stress to people that don't go looking up what people think is the best ending to this game. The best experience you're going to get out of this is that you're going to play this game for yourself and reach a conclusion and kind of come to your own consensus the same way that I like the first time I played Silent Hill 2 and I reached its conclusion, or at least the one I got. I didn't know whether or not if it was in quotes good ending or bad ending deemed by like the general populace and its fan base. So I got and like I learned afterwards that a lot of people don't think that's like the canon ending of that particular game, and I was like, oh, so with Signalis I've never really gone to search out what people think is like the definitive ending, because I think it was intentional that this game was meant to not have one definitive ending. I think it's worth exploring each of these endings and going back, or if you don't want to play it multiple times, just go look them up, of course, and kind of come to your own thoughts and conclusions, and maybe um search up others people's feelings, and maybe you'll share those same feelings with them or not. But just something I definitely want to kind of stress on, and just because like it has one of the not just best endings in video games for me and like ever now, but just something I love talking about with other people and what they take away from it.
I'm a bit like yeah, that like Sam said, it was just a huge kind of Silent Hill influence, and in terms of all endings feeling valid, I went back and I literally got the same ending both times I played the game. So I went and looked up the other ones just to kind of see what's there, and yeah, every it doesn't feel like that there's a good, a bad, and like a worse ending. Everything kind of feels valid with how it's laid out. So, and again, it's a cool thing that gives the game more genuine replayability, and it's very cool that after credits, the game gives you a classic like post game stat screen, and it kind of lays out all the information about like enemies killed, amp shots fired, the times you take. Like I love that. Any time a game like stat tracks you, It's like it's just always awesome. Like even Kingdom Hearts kind of has a little one that I like seeing the on screen of that. So
Ghost Runner reminded me how many times I died when I played that.
yeah, so it's cool. It tells you what ending you got.
Yeah, and I meant to mention this earlier. I think the game, I don't know, maybe you guys, I'm sure you guys flew through it faster than I did on the first time, but I want to say I was around 14 hours. I want to say for my first playthrough, I think. I forgot to jot it down or save it.
I forgot to jot that down too, and I think I played it all in like a 9 to 10 hour session. Like I just like I paused to go to the bathroom or like make coffee. It was the perfect day too. It was like a heavy snow day uh here where I live, like at that time of year. So I was just like, yeah, I'm not doing anything. I'm just gonna sit here in a dark room and play this game, and it's just the perfect atmosphere.
Yeah, I think I was at about like 7 to 8 hours.
But you completed all the act in your first playthrough?
Yeah,
Yes.
I know my second playthrough was a bit shorter. It might have been like it was still like 6 hours, but I flew through the stuff I remembered pretty quickly.
No, it's got that like Resident Evil type of structure where it's the very distinct kind of core areas, and you go through a couple of those, exploring them, and
Yeah, I was just under 12 hours.
the pacing feels perfect.
I was pretty happy with that
Yeah,
because
that makes
like
sense.
I obviously don't play a lot of true survival horror, so I feel like I got thrown into the deep end. When I go to play something like RE4 Remake or Dead Space 2, it'll be a little bit not quite as intense of a puzzle solving experience and backtracking and such. But no, I think we pretty much covered all of it. Do you guys have any other kind of final thoughts, wrap ups?
I'll do it. Yeah, I just like a fun fact to throw out there. This is my favorite game that was made with Unity since Hollow Knight, which both games famously a company and engine that is under a bit of fire in recent days. But I do just want to highlight like the fact that some of the best games I've played like this, and they have mentioned Hollow Knight, is that these games were made by very few people and are just bleeding passion projects, and from that kind of cement themselves in the genres that they like so clearly love, but they become their very own thing. Um and I guess just overall this is like the probably like I've logged like nearly 100 games this year, which is like not healthy. Like not normal. Most people like I think most people in a year play like if they're lucky like a handful of games. So like I've just like whatever free time I've had to play video games, I try. And out of all the games, new releases and old and whatever I've played within this past year alone, like this is still the game I'm thinking about the most. And if I were to choose, like, this technically came out last year, but I want to say this is my game of the year. And even last year, like this game to me is just as profound of an experience and like dream game that I had playing this, as much as I was played like Elden Ring last year, which is like a monumental achievement as well. So that really just again just using that word masterpiece, it's a word I don't like throwing around very often, and this game rightfully earns it. It is a one of a kind. I probably won't have an experience quite like this again with a game for quite a long time. And I going this was the game the survival horror genre needed for so long for me, where I love that Resident Evil has come back and it's had a resurgence, and it's also just brought back survival horror back to kind of like its more original roots. And there's a great, like, we're kind of in this horror renaissance right now, but if you're looking towards AAA horror, it's a lot of like it's it, it's kind of just it's sequels, but it's also remakes. And not there's Dead Space remake and RE4 remake are great, obviously. And um but I've for so long I've just been yearning for that new experience again, and the last time I truly had that was with Soma in the horror genre. And like finally, like this game couldn't have come at a better time for me when I played it. And no, yeah, and like it just, yeah, from the moment I started it and got through like the first section of the game, like it was just like lights in my brain, just like appeared, turned on, like just right then and there. The style, like I knew I was about to play something very special. It was like playing the original Dark Souls for the first time, or starting Resident Evil 4 for me the first time. Some of my, or when you enter Rapture for the first time in BioShock, it's like the opening to Signalis was that for me, and then from there on out, just it just got better and better, and it is one of the best games I've played in a very long time.
Fair enough. Well said. Moki, what about you? Final thoughts for the people?
I would echo the M word. This game is definitely a masterpiece. And it was also my game of the year of 2022. It's like Sam, I feel like I'm just like echoing all of Sam's, but it is everything I could have wanted in just 2023 fixed camera survival horror title. And I was definitely, just from the visual style and gameplay alone, I was already sold completely on the game, and I would definitely consider it to be an upper echelon survival horror game on that alone. But what they did with the world and story on top of that just really seals the deal. That I don't think that this game is standing on the shoulders of giants of Resident Evil and Silent Hill. I think it's a third giant. It's amazing. Please check it out and support them. I don't know what they will do next, but I will be there absolutely no matter what. And if they never make a game again, good for them.
If Yuri or Barbara were to ever, if they stumble upon this, you guys got my money day one. I'll be there no matter what. Next game, whatever you two cook up next, because it's this is the kind of stuff this was a reminder of why I love video games in the first place, and video games rarely do that for me. So
awesome. Well, so again, this is Signalis, released October 22nd, 2022 on all the major platforms. It is available physically. I think I bought it for Switch physically. In fact, I think I blind bought it again just by nature of all of the enthusiastic evangelizing for it. So please go out there and support it. I don't know if I mentioned it on this episode, but obviously I like to emphasize we are a physical game supporting podcast. We wholeheartedly support physical games for as long as these wonderful publishers deem it necessary to keep releasing them. We will keep buying them. So yeah, support the physical media, support the smaller indie devs, and I hope this is one of many feature games for Rose Engine, whether it is in Unity or not. Yeah, again, thank you both for making yourselves available on a weekday. Hope both of you have a great night and rest of your week, and we will see you next time.